Hi guys, and welcome to Bedtime History Relaxing. Tonight we step carefully onto the creaking wooden edge of a Boston wharf, where the air tastes of salt tar and something faintly sour that you cannot quite place. The water shifts below you in slow, patient movements, reflecting a pale, early light that has not yet decided whether it belongs to night or day. Ropes groan. Gulls call out in sharp echoing cries. Somewhere nearby a hammer taps steadily against wood as if the town itself is waking up piece by piece. You pause, taking it in. The smell is the first thing that truly settles on you. Salt, yes, but also fish left too long in barrels, damp wood, swollen from years of use, and the smoky trace of last night's fire still clinging to the air. It is not unpleasant exactly, but it is heavy. Real. It tells you immediately that this is a place where comfort is secondary to survival. You probably would not survive this for very long. Not because anything dramatic happens right away, but because everything demands something from you. The cold dampness seeps through your shoes. The ground beneath you shifts slightly with each step, reminding you that nothing here is fully stable. Even standing still feels like a quiet kind of work. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, share your location and the time where you are right now. There is something strangely comforting about knowing who else is listening out there in their own quiet corners of the world. Now dim the lights. You take a few steps forward, leaving the very edge of the harbour behind you, though it never quite leaves your senses. Ships sit anchored nearby, their dark shapes rising and falling almost imperceptibly. Some are large merchant vessels, their masts reaching upward like thin trees stripped of leaves. Others are smaller, practical, worn by years of short coastal journeys. A commonly accepted historical understanding notes that Boston in the 1770s was one of the busiest ports in British North America, handling goods that connected it to the wider Atlantic world. You can feel that importance here, not as an abstract idea, but as a constant background motion. Everything arrives. Everything leaves. Even now, before the sun has fully risen, men are already at work. You pass a group of dock workers hauling barrels from a small boat. Their movements are practiced, efficient, almost rhythmic. There is little conversation, just short instructions, the scrape of wood against wood, and the occasional grunt as weight shifts from one shoulder to another. One of them glances at you briefly, not unfriendly, but not particularly interested either. You are just another figure moving through a place where people rarely have time to wonder about strangers. You notice how layered the sounds are. Water against hull, rope tightening, boots on damp planks, a distant voice calling out something you cannot quite make out. It all blends together into a kind of steady, low music that never fully stops. There is a small detail that might surprise you. Some sailors carry small charms tucked into their clothing or tied discreetly near their belongings. A curious little habit suggests that despite the strict Protestant culture of the region, quiet superstitions still find their way into daily life. A carved piece of bone, a coin with worn edges, even a scrap of fabric believed to bring luck at sea. You might expect a place like this to be entirely practical, but beneath the surface, people still make space for small hopes they cannot fully explain. You move further along the dock and the town begins to rise in front of you. Not grandly, not in any dramatic skyline. Instead, it appears gradually a cluster of wooden buildings packed tightly together, their shapes irregular, their angles slightly off, as if each one was built with more urgency than precision. Smoke drifts from chimneys, thin and pale in the early light. The streets beyond the wharf look narrow, almost hesitant. You can already tell that once you step into them, space will become something you notice constantly because there is so little of it. Behind you the harbour continues its quiet motion, but ahead the town feels more contained, more human, and perhaps in its own way more complicated. A group of soldiers stands not far from the entrance to the street. Their red coats are unmistakable even in the muted light. They are not doing anything particularly aggressive. One leans slightly on his musket. Another adjusts his stance, shifting weight from one foot to the other. Still, their presence changes the atmosphere. A widely acknowledged fact is that British troops had been stationed in Boston since 1768 to enforce order and British laws, something that many locals resented deeply. You can sense that tension without anyone saying a word. It sits quietly in the space between people, in the way glances are a little shorter than they might otherwise be, in how conversations lower slightly as someone in uniform passes by. You walk past them. No one stops you, but you feel it anyway. That awareness of being observed, even if only briefly, it lingers longer than the moment itself. Historians still argue whether the constant presence of soldiers was more about maintaining order or deliberately asserting control over a restless population. Standing here, it feels like both at once. Order and pressure layer together so closely that it's hard to separate them. You step off the dock, fully now your feet finding firmer ground, though it is uneven and damp in places. The smell shifts slightly, less salt now. More earth, more smoke, more human life compressed into a small space. A cart rolls past you, its wooden wheels creaking loudly as it carries sacks of something you cannot immediately identify. The driver nods briefly in your direction, then continues on without slowing. The town is waking, not suddenly, but steadily. Doors open, voices emerge, footsteps multiply. There is no dramatic beginning to the day, just a gradual layering of activity until silence becomes something you can no longer remember. You take another breath, slower this time. The air is cooler here though, still heavy with everything it carries. You can feel it settle in your chest, grounding you in a place that does not try to make itself comfortable for you. And yet there is something deadyasu about it, predictable in a way. Work will begin. Meals will be prepared, conversations will unfold, and beneath it all, something else continues quietly like a current beneath the surface. A sense that this town is not entirely at ease with itself. That something is building even if no one can say exactly when it will arrive or what it will look like when it does. For now though, you simply walk, from the harbour into the narrow streets, from open water into enclosed life, carrying with you the sound of the waves even as they begin to fade behind you. The moment you leave the harbour behind, the space around you seems to tighten without warning. The wide openness of the water gives way to streets that feel narrower than you expected, as if the town has gently closed in around you. The ground underfoot is uneven, packed dirt mixed with stones damp in places, where yesterday's water has not yet dried. Your steps slow not by choice, but because the space itself asks you to move more carefully. The buildings rise on either side close enough that you could almost stretch out your arms and touch both at once in certain spots. Their wooden frames lean slightly shaped by time weather, and the quiet settling of materials that were never perfectly aligned to begin with. Windows are small, some with shutters still closed, others already open to let in the faint morning light. You notice the smells again, though they have changed. Less salt now, more life. Smoke from cooking fires drifts out into the street, mixing with the scent of damp wood, stale ale, and something less pleasant that lingers in corners and along the edges of the road. There are no hidden systems here to carry waste away neatly. What is used must go somewhere, and often that somewhere is not far from where you walk. You instinctively step a little more carefully. A widely recognized detail about colonial Boston is that it was one of the most densely populated towns in North America at the time, with thousands of people living within a relatively small area. Standing here, you do not need numbers to understand that. You can feel it in the closeness of everything, in how sound carries easily from one doorway to the next, in how privacy feels like something fragile, easily interrupted. A door opens just ahead of you. A woman steps out holding a small bucket. Her movements practiced and efficient. She barely glances in your direction as she empties its contents into the street's edge, then returns inside without ceremony. It happens quickly, as if it is simply another part of the morning routine, no more noteworthy than lighting a fire or sweeping a floor. You pause for a moment, then continue. You probably would not last long if you were too particular about where you stepped or what you smelled. The town does not bend to your comfort. It asks you to adapt instead. Voices begin to rise around you. Not loud, not yet, but enough to create a steady murmur that fills the space between buildings. A man calls out to someone across the street. A child answers from somewhere you cannot see. A door closes with a dull thud followed by the scrape of a bolt being set into place. There is a rhythm to it, not organised, not planned, but consistent. You pass a narrow alleyway, barely more than a gap between structures. It disappears into shadow, though you can hear movement within it. Footsteps, perhaps, or someone shifting objects from one place to another. You do not linger. The main street crowded as it. It still feels more open than whatever waits in that darker space. A small shop comes into view, its front already open to the street. Goods are arranged simply without much decoration. Cloth tools, a few everyday items that speak less of luxury and more of necessity. The shopkeeper stands just inside, adjusting something on a shelf, his attention focused entirely on the task at hand. It becomes clear that this is not a place built for display. It is built for use. A curious detail sometimes noted in personal accounts is that many Boston homes and shops shared walls or stood extremely close together, which meant that sounds carried easily between them. Conversations, arguments, laughter, even quiet moments of grief could often be heard by neighbours, whether they intended to listen or not. You begin to understand how that might feel. There is very little separation here. Lives overlap in ways that are both practical and unavoidable. You hear a burst of laughter from an upper window, then just as quickly it fades. Another voice follows, softer, harder to interpret, perhaps a disagreement, or simply a conversation that you are not meant to fully understand. It drifts down into the street, blending with everything else, until it becomes just another layer of sound. You continue walking. The street curves slightly, never quite forming a straight line. It feels organic, as if it grew over time rather than being carefully planned. Each turn reveals more of the same, yet never exactly repeated. A different doorway, a different arrangement of barrels stacked against a wall, a different pattern of light falling across the ground. You pass a man carrying a bundle of wood over his shoulder. He moves with steady determination, his focus entirely on the path ahead. As he shifts the weight slightly, you catch a glimpse of his hands roughened by work, the skin marked by small cuts and calluses that tell their own quiet story. There is no need for explanation here. The work is visible. Another widely accepted observation is that Boston's streets were often muddy, especially after rain due to the lack of proper paving in many areas. You feel that now as your foot sinks slightly into a softer patch of ground, the moisture seeping faintly through the sole of your shoe. It is not enough to stop you, but it is enough to remind you that even walking requires attention. You adjust your step and move on. Ahead, a small group has gathered near the edge of the street. They are not doing anything dramatic, just talking. But there is a certain intensity in the way they stand close together. Their heads inclined slightly inward as if the conversation matters more than the space around them. You slow as you pass. You do not catch every word, but you hear enough. Taxis, ships, orders from across the ocean. The tone is not calm, though it is controlled. There is a tension there held just beneath the surface, like something that has been discussed many times before and will be discussed many times again. Historians still debate how much ordinary people fully understood the political complexities of the time, or whether their concerns were more immediate and practical. Listening here, it feels less like abstract theory, and more like something that touches daily life in small, persistent ways. A delay in goods, an increase in cost, a rule that changes how something simple is done. You move past them, the conversation fading behind you, though its weight lingers. The street begins to narrow even further if that seems possible. The buildings lean slightly inward, their upper levels almost reaching toward each other. The light changes here, filtered and uneven, creating patches of brightness and shadow that shift as you walk. You notice how the air feels different too, warmer, more enclosed. The sounds are louder here, not because people are shouting, but because there is nowhere for the noise to go. It reflects off wood and stone, returning to you from all sides at once. You take a slower breath. There is something almost intimate about it, not in a comfortable way, but in a way that reminds you that you are never entirely alone. Even when no one is directly beside you, someone is always nearby. listening, moving, living their own version of this same morning. And as you continue forward deeper into the town, the harbour now fully behind you, you begin to understand that this closeness is not temporary. It is the shape of life here. Here, tight, layered, shared whether you choose it or not. The street bends again, and without quite realising it, you find yourself drawn toward a doorway where the movement of the morning feels slightly more contained. The sounds outside continue behind you, but here at the threshold of a modest home they soften just enough to make you pause. The door stands partly open. You step inside. The change is immediate. The air feels warmer, thicker, carrying the scent of something cooking slowly over a fire. Wood smoke lingers close to the ceiling, trapped there in a faint haze that shifts gently with each small movement in the room. The light is dimmer than outside, filtered through a small window that lets in just enough of the early morning to outline shapes rather than fully illuminate them. You take a moment to let your eyes adjust. The room is not large. A single space that serves many purposes. Sleeping, eating, working, all unfolding within a few steps of one another. A table stands near the centre, worn smooth by years of use. A few stools sit unevenly around it. Against one wall, a simple hearth holds the morning fire, its low flame steady, patient. A woman stands there stirring something in a pot. Her movements are practiced almost automatic, as if her hands know the rhythm without needing her full attention. She glances toward you briefly, acknowledging your presence without surprise, then returns to her work. You realize quickly that this is not a moment for ceremony. The day has already begun here. A broadly accepted historical understanding suggests that many Boston households in the 1770s were multifunctional spaces, often housing not just immediate family but sometimes apprentices or extended relations as well. You can sense that in the arrangement of the room. There is no extra space and every corner has a purpose. A child sits near the table, rubbing sleep from their eyes, their hair still uneven from the night. Another figure moves quietly into the background, folding a piece of cloth with careful precision. No one speaks much, not because they are unfriendly, but because there is no need to fill the space with unnecessary words. The quiet feels natural. You move a little closer to the table, noticing what has been set out. A rough loaf of bread, its surface dark and firm. A small portion of butter, pale and softening slightly in the warmth of the room. The pot on the fire releases a gentle steam carrying the scent of porridge made from grains that are simple but filling. You probably would not find this meal very exciting, but you would depend on it. The woman lifts the pot slightly, then sets it back down, testing its weight and heat with a familiarity that comes from doing the same thing every day. She reaches for a wooden bowl, ladles a portion into it, then places it on the table with a quiet, deliberate motion. The child reaches for it, immediately blowing gently across the surface before taking a cautious bite. There is something steady in this routine, comforting in its predictability. A small but interesting detail appears in some surviving accounts where families would stretch ingredients as far as possible by mixing different grains together, or by adding whatever was available at the time. Cornmeal, oats, sometimes even small bits of vegetables, all combined into something that could sustain rather than delight. You can imagine how each bowl might taste slightly different from one day to the next, shaped by what was available rather than what was preferred. You take a seat, the wooden stool firm beneath you. The bread is passed in your direction. You break off a piece, feeling the resistance of the crust before it yields. The texture is dense, heavier than what you might be used to, but it carries a certain honesty. It is exactly what it appears to be, nothing more. Across the room, a man adjusts his coat, preparing to step out into the day. His movements are efficient, each action completed without hesitation. He checks something at his belt, perhaps a small tool or coin, then glances briefly toward the table. There is no long farewell, just a nod, a shared understanding that the day ahead will be full, and that time is better spent moving forward than lingering in departure. Another widely recognized fact is that daily life in colonial Boston was structured around labor from a very early hour, especially for working families who depended on consistent effort to maintain even a modest living. You can feel that urgency here, though it is not frantic. It is steady like the fire in the hearth. The man steps towards the door, opens it, and the outside world returns in a rush of sound and cooler air. For a brief moment the two spaces overlap, inside and outside, quiet and movement. Then the door closes again and the room settles back into its contained rhythm. You continue eating. The porridge is warm, simple, filling, in a way that spreads slowly through your body. It does not demand attention, it supports it. You begin to understand how meals like this are less about enjoyment and more about preparation. Fuel for what comes next. The woman sits now, finally taking a moment for herself, though even this feels temporary. Her eyes move across the room, already anticipating the next task. A cloth to wash, a surface to clean, something to mend. There is always something. Historians still argue whether the emotional toll of such constant labour, especially on women managing both household and economic responsibilities, has been fully recognised in traditional narratives. Sitting here, you sense that wait not as something dramatic, but as something continuous. A quiet persistence that rarely announces itself, yet never truly fades. The child finishes their meal and slides the bowl slightly forward. No words are needed, the gesture is enough. The woman reaches for it, setting it aside with others that will soon need to be cleaned. You notice how little is wasted. Every movement has a purpose. Every item is used, reused, maintained. Nothing here feels disposable. The fire shifts slightly. A small pop breaking the steady quiet. A faint trail of smoke curls upward, catching the light for just a moment before disappearing into the dimness above. You sit there a little longer than you expect, not because there is nothing to do, but because the rhythm of the room has drawn you into it. It slows you just slightly, aligning your pace with everything around you. Outside, the town continues to build into its full day. Inside, the work never really stopped, and as you finally rise from the table, stepping back toward the door, you carry with you the quiet understanding that life here is not shaped by grand events alone. It is built piece by piece in rooms like this, in mornings like this, in meals that ask nothing more than that you keep going. You step back out into the street, the door closing behind you with a soft final sound that seems to seal that quiet domestic space away from the movement outside. The air greets you differently now, cooler against your face, sharper in its edges, carrying with it the growing energy of a town fully awake. The street is no longer in its early hush. It moves. People pass in both directions, each with a purpose that feels immediate, even if you cannot always see what it is. A man with ink-stained fingers walks quickly, clutching a folded paper. A woman balances a basket against her hip, her step steady despite the uneven ground. Two boys dart past you, their laughter brief but bright before it disappears into the surrounding noise. You fall into step with it all. There is no clear signal that tells you where to go, yet your body adjusts, finding a pace that matches the flow. You begin to understand that work here does not announce itself with grand gestures. It begins quietly, then continues without pause. You turn onto a slightly wider stretch of road where several workshops line one side. The doors are open, inviting the light in, but also revealing everything within. There is no separation between labour and the street. What happens inside spills outward, becoming part of the shared experience of the town. The first workshop you pass is filled with the sharp rhythmic sound of metal striking metal. A blacksmith stands over his work, his arm rising and falling, with a consistency that feels almost mechanical. Each strike sends a brief shower of sparks outward, fading quickly before they can touch the ground. The heat from the forge reaches you even from the doorway. It contrasts with the cool morning air, creating a pocket of warmth that feels almost alive. You pause just long enough to watch. The blacksmith does not look up. His attention remains fixed on the piece in front of him, shaping it through repetition, through force, through a kind of quiet patience that reveals itself only over time. It is often noted that skilled trades like blacksmithing, carpentry, and printing form the backbone of Boston's working life in this period, supporting both everyday needs and the larger economic structure of the colony. You can see that clearly here. These are not distant professions. They're immediate physical essential. You move on. Next comes a carpenter's space, the scent of fresh-cut wood replacing the sharp tang of metal. Thin curls of shaving scatter across the floor, catching the light in soft, pale tones. The sound here is different, less forceful. A steady scraping, the occasional tap, the quiet adjustment of tools that have been used so often they feel like extensions of the hands that hold them. An apprentice works nearby, younger, his movements slightly less certain. He pauses now and then, checking his progress, glancing toward the older man who guides him without needing to say much. A nod, a small correction, then the work continues. You realize that learning here is not separate from doing, it happens at the same time. A lesser-known observation from diaries of the period suggests that apprentices often lived with the families of their masters, becoming part of the household in ways that blurred the line between work and personal life. You think back briefly to the room you just left, imagining how easily another figure could have been folded into that space, sharing both labour and routine. You continue walking, the sound shifting again as you pass a small print shop. The air here smells faintly of ink and paper, a different kind of industry, quieter but no less important. Sheets hang to dry, their surfaces marked with neat lines of text that will soon travel through the town, carrying information, opinion, and perhaps something more subtle, influence. A commonly accepted point among historians is that printers and publishers in colonial cities played a significant role in shaping public thought, especially during times of political tension. Standing here, it does not feel abstract. Each sheet represents an idea that will move from one person to another, changing slightly with each reading, each conversation. You watch as a man carefully lifts a fresh page, inspecting it for imperfections. His brow tightens slightly, then relaxes as he sets it aside with the others. Precision matters here, even if the pace of the town seems to suggest otherwise. You step back into the street. The noise feels fuller now. Not louder in any one place, but more complete, as if every space is filled with its own version of activity. You notice how your body is adjusted. The uneven ground no longer surprises you. The smells no longer demand your attention in the same way. You move through them rather than reacting to them. You probably would not have expected how quickly this becomes familiar. Not comfortable exactly, but understandable. A cart passes close beside you, its wheels pressing deep into a softer patch of earth. The driver calls out briefly a warning more than a greeting, and you shift just enough to give him space. The moment is small, but it carries a sense of constant negotiation. Everyone adjusts slightly to everyone else. You pass another group of workers gathered outside a doorway, sharing a brief moment before returning inside. One of them gestures as he speaks, his voice animated, though the details are lost in the surrounding noise. There is a lightness there, a brief lifting of the day's weight before it settles again. Work here is not silent. It is filled with small exchanges, quick acknowledgements, moments that pass almost as soon as they appear. Some scholars continue to debate how much of this daily labour was driven by necessity alone, and how much by a sense of identity tied to one's trade. Watching these interactions, it feels like both. The need to earn, certainly, but also a quiet pride in the repetition in the skill that builds over time. You slow slightly as the street narrows again, the workshops giving way to more tightly packed homes. The transition is subtle but noticeable. The sounds shift from the defined rhythms of tools to the softer, more varied tones of domestic life. A door opens, a voice calls out, a laugh answers. The patterns change, but the movement continues. You take a breath, steady and unhurried. The day has fully begun now, and you are no longer just observing it. You are part of it. You continue forward, and at first nothing seems to change. The street still bends slightly. The buildings still lean inward. The sounds still layer themselves into that steady, familiar rhythm you have begun to recognize. But then you notice it, not in a single moment, but gradually, as if your awareness sharpens without you asking it to. The space feels different, more controlled, your steps slow just a fraction, not because anything blocks your path, but because something in the air has shifted. Conversations lower slightly as you pass. A glance lingers a little longer than it did before. Even the sounds seem to hold themselves more carefully, as though they are being measured. You look ahead, and there they are again. Red coats. Not just one or two this time, but several positioned along the street with a kind of quiet intention. They are not forming a barrier. They are not shouting orders, but their presence shapes the space all the same. You feel it immediately. A soldier stands near the edge of the road, his musket resting lightly against his shoulder. Another leans near a doorway, watching the movement of people as they pass. Their expressions are not harsh, but they are not relaxed either. There is a certain distance in their gaze, as if they are both part of this place and separate from it at the same time. A widely accepted historical point is that British troops had been stationed in Boston for years before open conflict began, a decision that deeply unsettled many residents who viewed the soldiers as an occupying force rather than protectors. Standing here, you understand why that feeling might take hold. No one stops walking, no one challenges them directly, but no one fully ignores them either. You move closer, your pace steady, your attention carefully balanced between looking and not looking too much. It becomes a quiet skill, to notice without staring, to pass without drawing attention. You probably would not enjoy this kind of awareness for very long. It settles into your body in subtle ways. Your shoulders hold a little more tension. Your breathing becomes slightly more measured. Even your footsteps feel more deliberate, as if each one should land exactly where it belongs. A man passes in the opposite direction, his eyes briefly meeting those of a soldier before shifting away again. The exchange lasts less than a second, but it carries a weight that lingers. Nothing is said, nothing needs to be. You continue. The street opens slightly into a small intersection where a few people have gathered near a corner. They speak in low tones, their heads inclined toward one another. You catch fragments as you pass. Supplies, orders, ships delayed. The words are practical, but the way they are spoken suggests something more. A quiet frustration, a sense of being watched even when no one is directly interfering. A small curious observation appears in some personal writings from this time, noting that soldiers and civilians often occupied the same public spaces, sometimes even the same buildings, leading to an uneasy coexistence where neither side felt entirely at ease. You can imagine how that might feel over time. Not a single moment of conflict, but a continuous low-level pressure. You step around a shallow rut in the ground, your foot landing on firmer earth just as a pair of soldiers walk past you. Their boots strike the ground in a steady rhythm more uniform than the varied steps of the townspeople. They do not look at you directly, but you feel their presence as they pass. The sound of their movement lingers even after they are gone. Further ahead, a doorway stands open, and inside you catch a glimpse of a small group gathered around a table. Their conversation stops briefly as one of the soldiers outside shifts position. It resumes a moment later, quieter than before. You begin to notice how often this happens. A voice lowers, a pause appears, a gesture becomes smaller. It is not fear exactly, but it is awareness. Another commonly recognized detail is that tensions between soldiers and civilians occasionally flared into confrontation, sometimes sparked by small misunderstandings that grew larger in the crowded streets. That possibility seems to hover here, not fully present, but not absent either. You continue walking your path, taking you past a row of buildings where the upper windows are already open. From one, a woman watches the street below, her expression unreadable. She does not move when the soldiers pass. She simply observes, as if trying to understand something that has no clear answer. You glance upward and for a moment, then back to the street. A cart approaches, and both you and a nearby soldier step aside at the same time to make space for it. The movement is almost synchronized, though unspoken. For a brief second, the separation between you feels less sharp. Then the cart passes, and the distance returns. Some historians continue to question whether the daily presence of British troops ultimately prevented disorder or contributed to it by increasing resentment among the population. Walking here, it feels like both possibilities exist at once, layered together in ways that are difficult to untangle. You reach the far side of the intersection and continue into a slightly quieter stretch of road. The number of soldiers decreases, though they do not disappear entirely. One stands at a distance, his figure partially framed by the buildings around him, still watching, still present. The sounds of the town begin to reassert themselves. Voices grow a little louder. footsteps a little less cautious. A door closes with a firmer sound than before. You feel your own body shift as well. The tension does not vanish, but it loosens slightly, like a knot that has not been untied, only eased. You take a slower breath. The air carries the same mixture of smoke, earth, and human presence as before, but now you notice something else beneath it. A subtle current that runs through everything. Not visible, not spoken aloud, but steady. A sense that this balance cannot hold forever. For now, though, the street continues. People move, work goes on, and you walk among them carrying that quiet awareness with you, even as the town folds you back into its ordinary rhythm. The street carries you forward almost without effort, as if the movement of others gently guides your own. The tension you just passed through does not disappear, but it softens into the background, replaced by something more familiar. Wariness gives way to curiosity again, and you begin to notice a different kind of gathering ahead. A tavern. You recognize it before you even reach the doorway. The sound comes first. A low, constant hum of voices layered together, rising and falling in uneven waves. Then the smell reaches you. Warm, thick, unmistakable. Ale, smoke, damp wood, and the lingering trace of something cooked hours ago but still present in the air. The door stands open. You step inside. The light shifts, immediately dimmer than the street, but warmer, shaped by the glow of candles and the low fire burning at one end of the room. Shadows move softly along the walls, stretching and shrinking, as people pass between them and the light. The space feels close, but not in the same way as the streets. Here the closeness gathers people together, rather than pressing them apart. You pause just inside the doorway. The floor beneath you is worn slightly uneven, marked by years of footsteps that have traced the same paths over and over again. A few tables sit scattered through the room, their surfaces marked by scratches, rings, and small imperfections that speak of constant use. A man at the counter lifts a mug, takes a long drink, then sets it down with a solid, familiar sound. Another leans forward near, speaking with quiet intensity to the person across from him. Nearby, a group laughs at something you cannot quite hear, the sound brief but genuine before it dissolves back into the general noise. You move further in. No one stops you. No one questions your presence. Places like this are not private in the way a home is. They are shared spaces open to those who can afford a drink or simply wish to be among others for a while. A commonly accepted observation is that taverns in colonial Boston serve not just as places to eat and drink, but as important centers for conversation, news, and political discussion. Standing here, you can feel that immediately. The air itself seems to carry ideas along with everything else. You find a place near the edge of the room, not fully part of any group, but close enough to listen. A mug is placed in front of you without much ceremony. The liquid inside is darker than you might expect, its surface catching the candlelight in soft, shifting reflections. You lift it slightly, the warmth seeping into your hand, then take a cautious sip. It's heavier than modern drinks, less refined, with a taste that lingers longer than you might be used to. You probably would not describe it as smooth, but it feels right for this place. The conversations around you begin to separate themselves from the general noise, individual threads emerging if you listen carefully. At one table, two men speak in low, measured tones. Trade slow. Slow ticket. Ships delayed. Cost rising. Their words are practical, grounded in daily concerns, but beneath them you sense something else. Frustration, perhaps, or uncertainty that has not yet found a clear direction. At another table, the tone is different, more animated. Voices rise slightly, then lower again as someone gestures toward the door, a subtle reminder of who might pass through it at any moment. The words here come faster. Rights, authority, distance across the ocean. You notice how often people lean in when they speak, as if drawing their words closer, keeping them contained within a smaller space. A small curious detail appears in some accounts of the time, noting that certain taverns became known for particular political leanings, attracting groups who shared similar views. You begin to wonder if that is happening here. Not openly declared, but quietly understood among those who return again and again. A man near you taps the table lightly as he speaks, his fingers creating a soft, steady rhythm that matches the cadence of his words. The person across from him listens intently, nodding once, then responding in a tone that is careful but firm. There is no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, but the energy is unmistakable. You take another sip, letting the warmth settle. The room feels alive in a different way than the street. Outside movement is constant but scattered. Here it gathers, focuses. Conversations overlap, but they also deepen, each one building on what came before. A broadly supported interpretation among historians suggests that informal spaces like taverns played a key role in shaping public opinion during the years leading up to the revolution. Ideas were tested here, repeated, challenged, refined. You can almost feel that process happening around you, even if you cannot follow every word. A chair scrapes softly against the floor as someone stands. A new group enters, bringing with them a brief rush of cooler air from outside. They pause, scanning the room, then move toward a table where others greet them with quiet familiarity. You notice how quickly people form small circles, not rigid groups, but shifting clusters that expand and contract as conversations change. You probably would find it difficult to keep track of everything being said. But perhaps that's not the point. The ideas move, even if you do not follow each one completely. Some scholars continue to debate how much influence these everyday conversations had compared to formal political writings and speeches. Sitting here, it feels impossible to separate them. The printed word may carry ideas across distance, but here those ideas take on a different shape. More immediate, more personal. A man near the fire leans back slightly, his voice softer now, as if he has reached the end of a point he has been building toward. The others at the table sit in brief silence, considering before one of them responds. You notice how often silence appears here. Here's here. Not empty, but full. A space where thought settles before it moves again. The candlelight flickers, slightly shifting the shadows along the walls. For a moment, the room feels almost still, as if everything has paused at once. Then it resumes. A laugh. A question. A reply. You sit there a while longer, letting the rhythm carry you. The warmth, the sound, the steady presence of others all blend into something that feels almost grounding. Outside, the town continues its work. Inside, something else unfolds alongside it. Not separate, but connected in ways that are not always visible. Eventually you rise. The movement feels natural, as if the room has already prepared you to leave before you fully decide to do so. You set the mug down, the sound soft but final, and make your way back toward the door. As you step outside, the light greets you again, brighter now, the day fully established. Behind you, the tavern continues, voices still rising and falling, ideas still moving, and you carry a trace of that with you as you return to the street where the ordinary and the uncertain continue side by side. You step back into the daylight, and for a moment the brightness feels sharper than before, as if your eyes need a second to adjust after the dim flickering warmth of the tavern. The air outside carries more movement now, more purpose. The day has fully settled into itself. You follow the flow of people once again, your path gently pulled toward a space that feels more open than the tight streets behind you. The market. It reveals itself gradually, first in sound. A different kind of noise, more scattered, more layered with individual calls and exchanges. Then in motion, people slowing, turning, stopping, not just passing through, but lingering. You step into it. Stalls line the edges of the space, each one arranged with a practical sense of order. Nothing here is decorative for its own sake. Everything is placed to be seen, to be reached, to be traded. Vegetables sit in rough baskets, their shapes uneven, their colours muted by dust and handling. Cuts of meat rest on wooden boards, their surfaces carefully watched by the person standing behind them. Fish lie on display, their scent stronger than anything else in the air, sharp and unmistakable. You probably notice that smell first. It does not fade. It settles. You move more slowly now, your attention shifting from direction to detail. A woman lifts a small bundle of herbs, examining it closely before setting it back down. A man counts coins in his palm, his brow tightening slightly as he calculates what he can afford. A well-established historical insight tells us that Boston's economy depended heavily on imported goods, especially items like tea textiles and certain food supplies. When those goods became harder to obtain, the strain showed up most clearly in places like this. You can feel that strain here, not in dramatic shortages, but in subtle adjustments. A basket that is not as full as it might have been, a price that causes hesitation, a conversation that takes longer than expected. You pause at one stall where a woman arranges small portions of grain into separate sacks. She measures carefully, adjusting each portion with a precision that suggests she cannot afford to be careless. Her hands move quickly but not hurriedly. There is a difference. Nearby, two people speak in low voices. "Less sugar this week. No shipment yet. We will make do." The words are simple, but they carry weight, not panic, not yet, but awareness. A recognition that something is shifting even if it has not fully settled into place. A small lesser-known detail found in personal letters of the period notes that many households began creating substitutes for imported goods during times of scarcity. Tea made from local plants, cloth repaired and reused far beyond its original lifespan. Even familiar tastes replaced with something close enough to serve the same purpose. You can imagine how that feels. Not the loss of something essential, but the gradual reshaping of what is considered normal. You continue walking, passing a stall where a young boy helps his father arrange goods. His movements are careful, slightly tentative, as if he is still learning the exact placement of each item. The father watches, offering a quiet correction now and then, guiding without interrupting the flow. You notice how learning happens here too, not in formal lessons, but in repetition, in observation, in doing the same task again and again until it becomes natural. A cart stands nearby, its contents partially covered with cloth. The driver lifts the edge, slightly revealing items that have not yet been set out. You catch a glimpse of something that looks finer than the rest, perhaps recently arrived, perhaps already promised to someone who came earlier. Timing matters here, being early, knowing when something might appear. It becomes a kind of quiet advantage. You shift slightly to let another person pass your shoulder, brushing lightly against theirs in the narrow space between stalls. The contact is brief, unremarkable, yet it reminds you again how little room there is between people in this town. Everything is shared, even movement. A widely discussed question among historians is how much these everyday economic pressures influence the broader political unrest of the time. Standing here, it feels less like a distant cause and more like a daily experience. The frustration does not need to be explained in grand terms. It is felt in small moments, in hesitation, in substitution, in the quiet recalculation of what is possible. You stop near a stall selling bread. The loaves are smaller than you might expect, their crusts darker, their shapes less uniform. You watch as one is weighed, then exchanged for a few coins. The buyer turns it over in their hands as if confirming its worth before moving on. Nothing here is taken lightly. Every purchase carries consideration. A voice calls out from across the market louder than the rest. It draws attention for a moment, then fades back into the general hum. You cannot catch the exact words, but the tone suggests urgency, perhaps the arrival of something new, or the last of something already scarce. You glance in that direction, but the crowd shifts and the view disappears. It does not matter. The feeling remains. You take a breath lower now. The air is full thick with overlapping scents and sounds, but you have begun to move within it rather than against it. Your steps adjust without thinking. Your attention shifts naturally from one detail to the next. You probably would not have expected how quickly this becomes familiar. Not easy, but understandable. A final glance across the market shows you something subtle. People are not just buying and selling, they are watching, listening, noticing who has what, who lacks what, who speaks with certainty and who hesitates. Information moves here too, not written, not formal, but present. And as you begin to step away, leaving the market behind, you carry that awareness with you, that beneath the surface of ordinary trade, something else is quietly taking shape. Not announced, not fully visible, but steady and growing. You leave the market slowly, the noise fading behind you in layers rather than all at once. Voices become less distinct, the sharper smells soften, and the open space narrows again into the familiar closeness of Boston's streets. Yet something from that place lingers with you, a sense of careful calculation, of quiet endurance. As you move forward, you begin to notice a different rhythm emerging around you, less tied to stalls and trade, more rooted in the steady, often unseen work that holds everything together. A doorway opens ahead and a woman steps out carrying a bundle of cloth balanced against her arms. She pauses briefly, adjusting her grip, then continues down the street with measured steps. The fabric shifts slightly as she moves, revealing layers beneath some neatly folded others worn thin at the edges. You follow her path for a few moments, not directly but close enough to observe. She stops at another house, knocks once, then enters without waiting long for a reply. The movement is quick, practiced, as if this is part of a routine repeated many times. You begin to see it more clearly now. The work that does not gather in one place. The work that moves quietly from door to door. It is often emphasized in historical accounts that women in colonial Boston were responsible not only for maintaining households but also for participating in informal economies through sewing, trading, and managing resources. You can sense that here not as a statement but as a constant presence woven into the day. You pass a window where another woman sits near the light, her hands moving steadily as she mends a garment. The needle passes through the fabric with small, precise motions, pulling thread tight, closing a tear that might otherwise grow larger with time. The act is simple, but necessary. Inside the same room, a pot rests near the fire, its contents shifting gently as it heats. A child sits nearby watching without speaking, their attention drifting between the movement of the needle and the quiet bubbling of the pot. Everything happens at once. Nothing is wasted. A small intriguing detail mentioned in some letters from the period is that women often coordinated with one another to share goods, labour, and information, forming networks that helped households adapt to shortages and changing conditions. You begin to recognise how that might look in practice. Not formal meetings, not organised system, but a steady exchange. A visit, a borrowed tool, borrowed tool, a shared task. You continue walking your pace, matching the quieter tone of this part of the town. The sounds here are softer, though no less constant. The scrape of a broom against the ground, the low murmur of conversation through a partially open door, the faint creak of a wooden frame adjusting as someone moves inside. You notice a woman standing just outside her home speaking with a neighbour. Their voices are low, but their expressions are focused. One gestures slightly with her hand indicating something down the street. The other nods her brow, tightening for a moment before easing again. The conversation ends quickly. Each returns to her own doorway. There is no lingering. Time moves forward and they move with it. You probably would not expect how much of this work goes unspoken. It does not demand attention. It simply continues. Another perspective widely discussed by historians is that organised boycotts of British goods relied heavily on the participation of women who managed household consumption and made decisions about what to buy or avoid. Standing here, that idea feels less like a political strategy and more like a series of everyday choices. What to use, what to repair, what to do without. You pass a small yard where laundry hangs on a line, moving gently in the light breeze. The fabric catches the sunlight, revealing its texture, its wear, its history. Some pieces are newer, their colour still strong. Others are faded, patched in places where time has left its mark. A child runs past you, then slows as they approach the doorway of a nearby house. Inside, a voice calls out and the child disappears within the door, closing softly behind them. The street remains, steady, occupied. You pause near another window where the faint sound of spinning reaches you. Inside, a woman sits at a wheel, her foot moving in a consistent rhythm, her hands guiding the fibres into thread. The motion is continuous, almost meditative, each turn building on the last. You watch for a moment. The repetition feels calming, grounding, yet you know it serves a larger purpose. Cloth must be made, clothing must be repaired. Nothing appears without effort. A question that continues to interest scholars is how much recognition women's contributions received at the time compared to their actual importance in sustaining both households and the broader community. Observing these moments, it feels clear that much of what holds this town together happens quietly. Without acknowledgement, yet without it everything would falter. You step back from the window and continue so. The street curves slightly again and the sounds begin to shift once more, blending this quieter rhythm with the more active flow you experienced earlier. The two do not replace each other. They overlap, exist together. You take a breath deeper now. The air feels different here, less crowded with competing scents, though still carrying traces of smoke and daily life. It settles more gently, allowing you to notice the smaller details. The texture of the ground beneath your feet, the way light falls across a doorway, the soft movement of fabric in the breeze. You probably would not remember every face you pass, but you would remember this feeling, that beneath the visible movement of trade and conversation, something steadier supports it all, something patient, something persistent. And as you continue forward, leaving this quieter stretch behind, you carry with you the understanding that this town is not held together by its loudest moments, but by its quietest ones. You continue walking, and for a while the rhythm remains steady. The quieter domestic world fades behind you, blending once more into the wider movement of the town. Yet something shifts again, not in the space itself, but in the energy that moves through it. It becomes lighter, less measured, more unpredictable. You hear it before you fully see it. A quick burst of laughter, the rapid patter of feet against the ground, a voice calling out not in instruction but in play. Children. They move through the street in a way that feels entirely different from the adults around them. Where others walk with purpose, they dart, pause, turn, and run again. Their path shaped more by impulse than by direction. Two boys rush past you, one chasing the other, with a stick held loosely in his hand, not as a weapon, but as part of a game only. They fully understand. Their steps are uneven, quick, and full of energy that does not yet need to be contained. You step slightly aside, allowing them to pass. They do not slow. They do not look back. The moment is brief, but it leaves a trace of movement behind it, like ripples that take a few seconds to settle. You continue forward and begin to notice more of them. A small group gathered near the edge of the street, crouched around something on the ground. You move closer just enough to see that they are playing with small objects, perhaps stones or bits of wood, arranging them into patterns that shift as quickly as they are made. One child looks up as you pass, their expression curious but unguarded. Then they return to the game, the outside world fading again into the background of their focus. It's widely recognized that children in colonial Boston were expected to contribute to household work from a young age, assisting with chores, errands, and learning skills that would carry into adulthood. Yet moments like this remind you that play still finds its place even within structured lives. You walk on. A girl stands near a doorway holding a small bundle of fabric. Her movements are careful, deliberate as she folds and refolds the material, perhaps practicing something she's been shown many times. Her attention is steady though now, and then she glances toward the street, watching the others with a quiet interest. You get the sense that she exists between two rhythms, play and responsibility, movement and stillness. A subtle detail recorded in some family accounts suggests that children often learn through observation long before formal instruction, absorbing patterns of behavior simply by being present. You can see that here, in the way the girl handles the cloth, in the way the boys mimic gestures they may have seen in adults even within their games. You pass a narrow space where a few children have gathered to listen to an older figure speaking softly. The tone is calm, measured, perhaps a lesson, perhaps a story. You cannot hear the words clearly, but the stillness of the group suggests attention. Learning does not always look formal. Sometimes it looks like this, a shared moment, a quiet voice. You probably would not expect how quickly these roles begin to form. Not announced, not assigned with an daughter with ceremony, but shaped gradually through repetition and expectation. A boy carries a small bucket, his steps slower than those who run past him. The weight is not great, but it is enough to change how he moves. He walks carefully, focused on not spilling what is inside. As he passes you, he adjusts his grip, his concentration unwavering. Work and play exist side by side, neither fully replacing the other. Another point often explored by historians is how childhood in this period differed from modern ideas, with less separation between children's lives and adult responsibilities. Watching here, it feels less like a contrast and more like a gradual transition. The same street holds both. You hear a sudden shout followed by laughter. One of the boys has stumbled not seriously, but enough to draw attention. He rises quickly, brushing off his clothes with a brief impatience before rejoining the others. The moment passes. Nothing stops. The town continues around them, adjusting slightly but never pausing entirely. You notice how adults respond. A glance, a brief word, then back to their own tasks. There is awareness but not constant intervention. You move further along and the street widens slightly, allowing more space for movement. Here the children spread out more, their games less confined. Their voices carrying further before dissolving into the general sound of the town. A girl skips across the open space, her steps light, almost rhythmic. The motion feels different from everything else you have seen. Less tied to necessity, more to the simple act of moving. You watch for a moment, then continue. Some scholars continue to discuss how much freedom children experienced in daily life, balancing expectations of work with opportunities for play. Standing here, it feels like a delicate balance, one that shifts depending on time, place and circumstance. You take a slower breath. The air feels slightly clearer in this wider space, though, still touched by the same mixture of smoke and human presence. It moves more freely here, carrying sound and scent with less intensity. You probably begin to notice something else as well. The way time feels different in these moments. Less measured, less structured, even as the day continues around you. You step past the open space and back into a narrower stretch of the street, the sounds shifting again, the energy settling slightly. The children remain behind you, their voices fading gradually, though not entirely. They become part of the background, a reminder that even in a town shaped by tension, work and uncertainty, there are still moments that belong to something simpler, something lighter. And as you continue forward, you carry that with you, a small contrast to everything else you have begun to understand about this place. The sound of children fades behind you. Not completely gone, but softened into the background like a memory that lingers without asking for attention. The street narrows again, guiding you forward with that familiar sense of enclosure until something steadier begins to rise through the air. A bell. At first it is distant. A low measured tone that carries further than any voice. Then it comes again clearer this time, each note spaced with deliberate care as if it is marking time rather than filling it. You slow without meaning to, others do the same. Not stopping entirely, but adjusting their pace, their posture, their attention. The sound seems to reach into the space between people, drawing a quiet line that everyone feels, even if no one acknowledges it directly. You follow it. The street opens slightly, revealing a meeting house set back just enough to distinguish it from the surrounding buildings. It is not grand in the way you might expect from places of worship in later times. Its structure is simple, its lines clean, its presence defined more by purpose than decoration. You approach, the door stands open, and people begin to gather, not in a rush, but with a steady shared understanding of where they are meant to be. Some enter immediately, others pause outside, exchanging brief words before stepping inside. You move closer, then follow. The interior is quiet, not silent but restrained. Wooden benches line the space, their surfaces worn smooth by years of use. The light filters in through high windows, falling in pale shapes across the floor. Dust moves slowly within those beams, visible only when it catches the light at just the right angle. You take a seat. The air feels different here. Still, held. A commonly noted feature of colonial New England life is the central role of religion in shaping both personal behavior and community expectations. Sitting here, the influence does not feel distant or abstract. It settles into the space itself, guiding how people move, how they sit, how they wait. A man stands at the front, his presence calm, his posture steady. When he begins to speak, his voice is not loud, but it carries easily through the room. Each word is measured, each pause intentional. You listen. Not every phrase stays with you, but the rhythm does. The way the voice rises slightly, then settles again. The way silence is allowed to exist between thoughts rather than being filled too quickly. Around you, people sit with quiet attention. A child shifts slightly, then stills. A woman folds her hands more tightly in her lap. A man lowers his gaze, focusing on something unseen. You notice how even small movements feel more deliberate here, contained. A lesser-known observation from diaries of the time mentions that attendance at religious gatherings was often expected not only as a matter of faith but as part of maintaining one's place within the community. You begin to understand how that expectation shapes this moment. It is not only about belief, it is about belonging. You sit a little straighter without thinking. Your breathing slows. The outside world, with all its movement and noise, feels distant now, even though it remains just beyond the walls. The speaker pauses. For a moment there is complete stillness. No shifting, no whispering, just the quiet presence of many people sharing the same space. You probably would not be used to this kind of silence, not because it is empty, but because it is full of attention. The voice resumes softer now, drawing the room back into its rhythm. You feel the words less as individual ideas and more as part of a steady flow, something that moves through the space rather than staying fixed in one place. A question often raised by historians is how deeply these teachings influence daily decisions beyond the walls of places like this. Sitting here, it feels as though the boundary between belief and action is thin, almost invisible. The structure of the room reinforces it. The shared attention, the collective stillness. You glance briefly toward the window where light continues to shift slowly, marking the passage of time in a way that feels almost separate from the rest of the world. You return your gaze forward. The voice continues. The words settle. Another pause. This time it lasts slightly longer. You feel it, not as discomfort, but as space. A moment where nothing is required of you except to remain present. Then movement begins again, subtle at first, a shift of weight, a quiet breath. The gathering begins to loosen not abruptly but gradually, as if the room itself is releasing its hold. People rise, slowly, without urgency. You stand as well, your body adjusting back into motion after the stillness. The door opens and the outside air returns, carrying with it the familiar mix of sound and scent that defines the town. For a moment the two worlds overlap again. Then you step outside. The light feels brighter, the sound sharper. Yet something from inside remains with you, a steadiness, a sense of order that lingers even as the unpredictability of the street resumes. You take a breath. The bell does not ring again, but its presence seems to echo faintly in your mind. And as you continue walking, rejoining the flow of the town, you carry that quiet structure with you, even as everything around you begins to move once more. You step away from the meeting house and the quiet discipline of that space begins to loosen its hold on you. The street receives you again, not abruptly, but with a steady return of movement and sound. Voices rise in uneven layers. Footsteps overlap. A cart rolls past its wheels, pressing into the earth with a familiar creak. Yet something feels sharper now, more alert, as if the stillness you just left behind has made everything else stand out more clearly. You walk on, and soon your attention is drawn to a cluster forming ahead. Not a crowd in the sense of urgency or alarm, but a gathering that has purpose. People stand closer together than usual, their bodies angled inward, their focus directed toward a single point. You move closer. At the center, a man stands with a sheet of paper in his hand. He reads aloud, his voice firm, steady enough to carry over the surrounding noise. The words are structured, deliberate, shaped to be heard and remembered. You do not catch everything at once, but certain phrases stand out. Orders, authority, response. The tone is careful, but it carries weight. A widely accepted observation is that printed material such as broadsides and pamphlets became a powerful way to spread information in colonial cities, especially in times of tension. Standing here, you feel that influence directly. The written word is no longer quiet on the page. It becomes sound. It becomes presence. You shift slightly to see better. The paper itself is simple. No decoration, just lines of text arranged with clarity. Yet the attention it commands suggests that its value lies not in how it looks, but in what it carries. The man pauses briefly, then continues. Around you people listen. No, listen. Some with arms folded, some leaning forward, some standing still, their expressions difficult to read. A woman near you nods once, almost imperceptibly. Another person shakes their head slightly, then stills again as if reconsidering their reaction. The response is not uniform, but it is engaged. A curious detail noted in accounts from the period is that many people who could not read would still gather to hear texts read aloud, allowing information to circulate beyond those who had formal literacy. You begin to understand how that works. The voice carries the words outward, making them accessible, shared. You listen more carefully now. The phrasing is precise, measured. Each sentence builds on the one before it, creating a sense of direction. Even if you do not fully grasp every detail, you probably would not expect how much weight a single sheet of paper can hold. Not physically, but in how it moves through people. The reading ends. There is a brief silence, not empty but full of thought. Then the sound returns. Voices quieter at first begin to rise again as people turn to one another. The paper is passed from hand to hand, each person glancing at it some longer than others. You step back slightly, allowing the group to shift around you. Nearby, another man speaks, not reading but explaining. His words are less formal, more direct, shaped by his own understanding. A few people listen, others move on, carrying fragments of what they have heard with them. The information does not stay in one place. It spreads. A commonly discussed idea among historians is that public opinion during this period was shaped not only by official statements but by how those statements were interpreted and discussed in everyday settings. Watching this unfold, it feels less like a theory and more like a visible process. Words move. They change slightly. They settle differently depending on who hears them. You continue walking, leaving the group behind, though their voices follow you for a short distance before fading into the general sound of the street. A shop comes into view, its doorway open, revealing stacks of paper inside. You step closer, peering in. Sheets are arranged in small piles, some newly printed, others already handled enough to show wear along their edges. The air smells faintly of ink. Fresh. Distinct. A printer works near the back, his hands moving with practiced precision. He adjusts a sheet, presses it into place, then lifts it carefully, inspecting the result before setting it aside. The motion repeats. Steady, focused. You watch for a moment, noticing how little variation there is in each movement. The consistency suggests not monotony but control. Each step must be exact to produce something that others will trust. A lesser-known note from historical records suggests that print shops often served as informal hubs of communication where news arrived, was processed, and then sent back out into the town. You can imagine that happening here. Information entering in one form, leaving in another. You step away and return to the street. The sounds feel fuller again, but now you hear them differently, more aware of what they might carry. A conversation nearby catches your attention, not because it is loud, but because of the words. Agreement, doubt, possibility. The speaker gestures slightly, emphasizing a point, then lowers his hand, his expression thoughtful. You do not stop, but you listen as you pass. A question often raised by historians is how much consensus actually existed among ordinary people during this time, or whether opinions were more divided than later narratives suggest. Listening here, it feels as though both unity and uncertainty exist side by side. Not resolved, but present. You continue forward. The street bends again, and the group you left behind is no longer visible. Yet the sense of movement remains. Not just physical movement, but something less visible. Ideas, carried from one place to another, from one voice to the next. You take a breath, steady and unhurried. The air feels the same, but you feel slightly different within it. More aware, more attentive. And as you walk on, the town continues to unfold around you, shaped not only by what people do, but by what they say, what they hear, and what they choose to believe. You keep moving, though the voices from the reading still echo faintly in your mind. The street carries you onward, and for a time the rhythm feels familiar again. Work continues. Conversations rise and fall, doors open and close. The town breathes in its usual way. But as the light begins to soften, something shifts. Not suddenly, gradually. The edges of the day begin to blur. Shadows lengthen along the walls, stretching across the uneven ground in shapes that move slowly as the sun lowers. The air cools slightly, carrying less heat from the day's activity and more of the dampness that seems to settle in once the sun begins to retreat. You notice it in your skin first, then in your breath. The street does not empty. It changes. People still move, but their pace is different now. Less hurried though, not relaxed. The urgency of daytime work gives way to something more cautious, more aware of what cannot be seen as clearly. A lantern is lit in a doorway, then another. Small points of light appear one by one, scattered along the street, each creating its own small circle of visibility. Between them the space grows darker, less defined. You walk into it. The sounds shift again, voices lower. Footsteps become more distinct, each one standing out against the quieter background. A cart passes more slowly than before, its driver guiding it carefully through the dimming light. You probably would not feel entirely comfortable walking here alone at night, not because anything has happened, but because of what might. A commonly recognized feature of colonial towns is that nighttime brought increased uncertainty with limited lighting and fewer formal systems of security. Standing here, that reality feels immediate. The town is still present, but less visible, less predictable. You move closer to the edge of the street where the glow from a nearby lantern offers a little more clarity. The light flickers slightly, shifting with the movement of the air, casting shadows that seem to change shape as you watch them. A group stands near one of the lit doorways, their conversation quiet, their bodies close together. One of them glances toward the darker stretch of the street, then back to the group as if measuring the distance between safety and uncertainty. You continue. The ground beneath your feet feels less certain now, the uneven patches harder to see. You adjust your steps, relying more on memory than sight, recalling the rhythm you've already learned. A small intriguing detail appears in some accounts describing how night watchmen would patrol the streets, calling out the hour and keeping an eye on the town. You listen for such a voice, and after a moment you hear it. Faint at first, then clearer. A call steady and practiced, marking time in a way that feels both reassuring and distant. It does not fill the silence. It punctuates it. You follow the sound briefly, though it moves away from you as the watchman continues his path. The call fades, then returns again from a different direction, carried by the shifting air. You realize how important that presence must be, not because it prevents every danger, but because it reminds people that someone is awake, watching. You pass a narrow alley, darker than the rest of the street. The entrance seems to absorb what little light reaches it, creating a space that feels deeper than it should be. You do not stop. You keep walking. Your attention shifts slightly, your awareness extending just a bit further ahead, just a bit wider around you. A question that continues to interest historians is how safe these streets truly were at night, and how much of the fear associated with them came from real incidents versus perception. Walking here, it feels difficult to separate the two. The darkness shapes your thoughts as much as any event could. You step into another pool of light, this one brighter cast from a window where activity continues inside. You catch a glimpse of movement, figures still working, still talking their day, not yet fully complete. The light spills outward, briefly softening the edges of the night. Then you pass it, and the darkness returns. You probably begin to notice how sound replaces sight in guiding your awareness. A footstep behind you, a door closing somewhere ahead. The faint rustle of fabric as someone moves past you, their presence felt more than seen. You adjust again, your pace steady but careful. Another voice reaches you, not the watchman this time, but a quiet conversation between two figures standing just beyond the edge of the light. Their words are too soft to follow, but their tone suggests familiarity, perhaps reassurance. The night does not silence the town. It changes how it speaks. A perspective often explored by historians is that nighttime spaces encourage different kinds of interactions, less formal, more private, shaped by the reduced visibility. You can sense that here. Conversations feel closer, movements more intentional. You continue walking. The street begins to widen slightly again, and with it the light becomes more consistent, though still limited. A few more lanterns burn steadily, creating a path that feels more defined. Your shoulders relax just a fraction, not fully, but enough. You take a slower breath. The air is cooler now, carrying the scent of soak and damp wood, less crowded than during the day, but still unmistakably tied to the life of the town. Behind you the darker stretches remain. Ahead the light continues, and you move between them, aware of both, understanding that this is another layer of Boston's daily life. Not separate from the day, but its quieter, more uncertain continuation. You continue along the lantern-lit path, your steps settling into a quieter rhythm as the night deepens around you. The pools of light guide you forward, but between them the darkness feels thicker, now more complete. The town has not gone silent yet, its energy has shifted inward. The air carries a sharper edge, cooler, heavier. You draw a breath and feel it settle differently in your chest, less crowded than during the day, yet more noticeable in its presence. Smoke lingers low, drifting from chimneys where fires are being tended for the night. It mixes with the faint scent of damp earth, creating something that feels both grounding and slightly oppressive. You move on, your awareness extending just a little further than before. The street narrows again, and here the signs of daily life appear in a different form. Not movement, but residue. Marks left behind by the day's activity. Ruts in the ground where carts have passed repeatedly. Small piles of debris pushed toward the edges. Water that has not fully drained, reflecting the faint light in uneven patches. You step carefully. The surface feels less predictable now, and you rely on the memory of your earlier steps to guide you. A well-documented aspect of Boston's physical environment in this period is that many streets lacked proper drainage and paving, which made them especially difficult during wet or cold conditions. Even now, without heavy rain, you can feel the lingering effects. The ground gives slightly under your weight, reminding you that stability here is never guaranteed. You pause briefly near a doorway where a small fire burns inside. The light spills outward, and with it comes warmth, just enough to contrast with the cool air outside. You stand there for a moment, not entering but appreciating the difference. Inside, someone moves slowly, their figure partially obscured by shadow. A pot is being stirred. A chair shifts slightly. The sounds are soft, almost private, yet they reach you all the same. You continue. A sudden gust of wind moves through the street, subtle but noticeable. It carries with it a swirl of ash from a nearby chimney, the fine particles catching the light for a brief second before disappearing into the darkness. You blink, then move on. You probably would not think much about fire during the day when everything feels open and visible, but at night it becomes something else entirely. Necessary, constant, and quietly dangerous. A small but telling detail appears in historical accounts describing how closely built wooden structures made towns like Boston highly vulnerable to fire, especially in colder months when hearths burned continuously. You look around now, noticing how close the buildings stand to one another, their walls separated by only the narrowest spaces. It would not take much. The thought lingers. You walk a little more slowly. Further ahead, a figure moves with purpose, carrying a small lantern held low. The light sways gently with each step, creating a shifting circle that reveals the ground just ahead of them. You watch as they navigate the uneven surface with practiced ease, their familiarity with the path clear in the confidence of their movement. You follow at a distance. The lantern becomes a guide, not for direction, but for rhythm. Step by step, light then shadow, light then shadow. It feels almost meditative. A question that continues to occupy historians is how people adapted to these environmental challenges on a daily basis, balancing necessity with risk. Watching this quiet navigation through darkness, it seems that adaptation becomes second nature, something learned through repetition rather than instruction. The figure turns down a side street and disappears from view. The light goes with them. You are left once again in a dimmer stretch, your own path less defined. You adjust. Your pace slows slightly. Your senses sharpen. A door opens somewhere behind you, the sound distinct in the quieter air. You turn your head just enough to register it, then continue forward. Moments later, the door closes again and the sound fades. You begin to notice how sound travels differently now. Further, clearer. Each small noise carries more weight. A footstep, a cough, the faint clink of something being set down. You probably find yourself listening more than looking, trusting what you hear. Another perspective explored by historians is how environmental discomforts such as cold dampness and poor sanitation shape daily endurance in ways that are easy to overlook in broader narratives. Walking here, you feel those elements directly. Not overwhelming, but persistent. The cool air against your skin, the uneven ground beneath your feet, the faint, ever-present scent of smoke. They do not demand attention. but they never fully disappear. You step into another pool of light, this one cast from a lantern hanging above a doorway. The flame flickers slightly, responding to the movement of the air, its glow steady enough to illuminate the immediate space. You pause beneath it. For a moment, everything feels clearer. The texture of the ground, the grain of the wood in the door, the edges of your own shadow stretching behind you. Then you step beyond it, and the darkness returns. You continue walking, your body now fully adjusted to the rhythm of the night, each step measured, each breath steady. The town remains around you, not asleep, but quieter. Its presence felt more through subtle signs than obvious activity. And as you move forward, guided by scattered light and practiced awareness, you begin to understand that this too is part of life here. Not just the visible work of the day, but the quieter endurance of the night. You move onward, your steps steady, now your senses tuned to the quieter patterns of the night. The town feels thinner in this light, as if parts of it have withdrawn, leaving behind only what must remain. Then, without warning, you begin to notice something else. Not sound, not movement, memory. It comes through conversation first. Two figures stand near a doorway ahead, their voices low but firm. You cannot hear every word, but one name reaches you clearly. Then another. A date. A place you've already walked through without realizing its weight. You slow. You listen. They are speaking of something that has already happened, but it has not passed. You continue walking, and as you do, you begin to recognize small signs that this memory lives in the town itself. Not marked with grand structures or clear boundaries, but carried in the way people speak, in the pauses that appear in certain conversations. You reach a part of the street that feels no different from the others at first glance. Wooden buildings, uneven ground, faint light, and yet something about it feels held. You stop. A well-established historical understanding identifies the Boston Massacre of 1770 as a defining moment in the relationship between soldiers and civilians, an event that deepened mistrust and reshaped public feeling in the town. Standing here, you realize that the impact of that moment is not confined to the past. It lingers, not loudly, but persistently. You look around, imagining the space as it might have been. The same narrow street, the same closeness, the same mixture of tension and routine that you have already begun to understand. A small, often overlooked detail in eyewitness accounts is how quickly confusion took hold during the incident, with noise, crowd movement, and limited visibility, making it difficult for those present to fully understand what was happening in the moment. You can almost feel that uncertainty now, as if it still echoes faintly in the space. You probably would not recognize the exact spot without being told. There is no clear marker, no boundary that separates this place from any other. But the people remember, and that memory shapes how they move through it. You hear footsteps behind you and step slightly aside, allowing another person to pass. Their pace is measured, their gaze forward, though their expression seems distant, as if their thoughts are elsewhere. You wonder briefly if they are thinking of the same thing, or something entirely different. You continue walking, your pace slower now, your attention turned inward as much as outward. The night seems to hold the past more easily, allowing it to surface in ways that the busy daylight might not. A voice reaches you from a nearby window, speaking quietly, recounting something to someone inside. You catch fragments. Shots. Crowd. Fear. The words are not dramatic. They are careful, as if the speaker is choosing them with intention, shaping the memory into something that can be shared without losing control. A question that continues to engage historians is how events like the Boston Massacre were remembered differently by those who witnessed them, with perspectives shaped by position, belief, and distance. Standing here, it feels as though multiple versions of that moment exist at once, layered over the same space. You take a breath. The air feels cooler now, though. Perhaps it is simply your awareness that has changed. You pass another doorway where a faint light reveals two figures seated close together. One speaks softly while the other listens, their posture still attentive. The conversation seems less about facts and more about meaning, what it meant, what it changed, what it might lead to. You move on. The street opens slightly and the sense of weight begins to ease, though it does not disappear entirely. It follows you, quieter now, but present. A man stands alone near the edge of the road, his gaze directed toward the ground. He does not move as you pass his stillness, distinct from the steady motion of others. For a moment you consider stopping. You do not. Some spaces ask only to be passed through. Some thoughts remain unspoken. Another perspective explored by historians is how public memory of the event was shaped not only by those who experienced it directly, but also by how it was retold, printed, and shared in the years that followed. You think back to the voices you heard earlier, the printed sheets, the conversations that carried ideas from one person to another. This is part of that. Memory moving, changing, settling into the town itself. You step into a brighter stretch of the street where a lantern burns more steadily, its light clearer, more stable. The shadows retreat slightly, and with them the intensity of what you have just felt. Your shoulders ease, your breathing steadies, the present returns, not fully separate from the past, but more immediate. You probably begin to understand that life here is not shaped only by what is happening now, but by what has already happened and how it is remembered. You continue forward, leaving that place behind you, though. Its presence lingers in your thoughts. The town resumes its quieter rhythm, the night carrying on as it always does. But you carry something with you now, a deeper awareness that beneath the ordinary movement of daily life there are moments that do not fade. They remain quiet, persistent, shaping everything that comes after. You move beyond that heavy stretch of memory, and slowly the night begins to loosen its grip. The air feels a little less still, a little more open, as if the town is allowing you to breathe more freely again. The street bends, gently guiding you toward a space that feels familiar, though you cannot yet place why. Then you smell it. The harbour. Faint at first, carried lightly on the air. Salt-damp wood, something metallic beneath it, subtle but distinct. You have come full circle in a way, though not entirely back to where you began. This part of the town feels different, less contained, more open to the edge of something larger. You walk on and soon the space widens just enough for movement to feel less restricted. The buildings pull back slightly, revealing a stretch of ground that slopes gently toward the water. The light here is uneven, shaped by lanterns that stand further apart, leaving longer shadows between them. A small group stands ahead, gathered near the edge. You approach carefully. Their voices are low but not hidden. There is a sense of purpose in the way they stand, their bodies angled inward, their attention shared. You hear a word repeated. Tea, then another. Shipment. You pause at a distance, listening without intruding. A broadly accepted historical account identifies the events surrounding the destruction of tea in Boston Harbor in 1773 as a pivotal act of protest against British taxation. Standing here, you realize that such moments do not appear suddenly. They grow from conversations like this, from ideas that move quietly before they take form. One of the figures gestures toward the water, though you cannot see much beyond the dark outline where it meets the shore. The movement is subtle, but it carries meaning. Not yet, but soon. A small but intriguing detail noted in some recollections is that those involved in the planning of such acts often spoke in careful terms, avoiding direct statements, using implication rather than declaration. You can sense that here. The words are chosen with care, leaving space between them. You probably would not follow every detail, but you understand enough. There is intention, there is preparation, and there is something else. Resolve. The group shifts slightly as one person steps back, their gaze moving briefly toward the street before returning to the others. Awareness remains constant even in moments of quiet planning. You step back as well, not wanting to draw attention. The conversation continues without you. You turn and begin to walk along the edge of the harbour, the sound of water faint but steady, its movement slower than the activity of the town behind you. The air feels different here. Cooler, more open. You take a deeper breath. The scent of salt settles more clearly now, mixing with the lingering traces of smoke from the town. The combination feels both familiar and distinct, marking this place as something separate even though it is deeply connected to everything else. A question that continues to interest historians is how much of the protest movement was driven by organized leadership versus spontaneous action among ordinary people. Walking here, it feels as though both forces exist together, shaping each other in ways that are not always visible. You hear footsteps behind you and turn slightly. Another figure walks along the same path, their pace unhurried, their gaze directed toward the water. They do not acknowledge you and you do not speak. The shared silence feels natural. You continue. The harbour stretches beside you dark and steady, reflecting only small fragments of light from the lanterns behind you. Ships sit further out, their shapes barely visible, their presence suggested more by outline than detail. You imagine them during the day, busy, active. Now they rest, or perhaps they wait. A faint sound reaches you, wood against wood, a rope shifting slightly. Small movements that continue even when most of the town has slowed. You probably would not think of this place as quiet, but it is quieter, and in that quiet thoughts seem to carry further. You slow your pace, allowing the rhythm of the water to guide your steps. It moves steadily, unaffected by the conversations, the tensions, the decisions being made just beyond its edge. Constant, indifferent. Another perspective explored by historians is how symbolic acts like the destruction of tea were intended not only to protest specific policies but to send a message that could not be ignored. Standing here, that idea feels less abstract. The water, the ships, the goods they carry all become part of something larger. You pause near the edge, looking out. The darkness hides most details, but it does not hide the presence. You feel it. The connection between this place and everything that has been discussed, argued, and imagined throughout the town. You take a slow breath. The air fills your lungs, cool and steady. Behind you, the town continues its quiet night. Ahead, the harbour stretches outward, carrying possibilities you cannot fully see. And as you stand there between land and water, between what has happened and what is being prepared, you begin to understand that moments like this exist just before change becomes visible. Not loud. Not dramatic, but certain. You turn back towards the street, leaving the harbour behind once more. The path ahead is dim but clear enough, and you walk on carrying with you the sense that something is approaching even if it has not yet arrived. You turn away from the harbour, and as you do, the openness behind you gives way once again to the tighter structure of the town. The air changes almost immediately. Less salt, more smoke, more of that enclosed feeling that seems to settle between the buildings. Yet something feels different now, not in the space itself, but in the mood that moves through it. You notice it first in the quiet. Not the calm quiet of the meeting house, not the layered quiet of the night, but a quieter kind of absence. The street ahead is less crowded than you would expect even for this hour. A few figures move along its length, but there are gaps between them, stretches where no one passes for several moments. You walk forward, your steps echoing slightly more than before. A door stands closed where earlier you remember seeing it open. Another window is dark, its interior hidden completely from view. The small signs of life that filled the town during the day seem reduced, not gone, but held back. A widely accepted historical interpretation connects the passage of the Coercive Acts in 1774 with a sharp change in daily life in Boston, particularly through the closing of the port and the disruption of trade. As you move through this quieter space, you begin to sense what that might feel like on a personal level, not a dramatic ambulance, but a gradual thinning. You pass a shop that appears closed for the night, though something about it suggests more than that. The goods inside are fewer than you would expect. Shelves that might have been full now hold only a scattering of items arranged carefully to fill the space they occupy. You slow slightly. The absence becomes visible when you look for it. A faint light glows from within, and you catch a glimpse of someone moving slowly between the shelves. Their pace is unhurried, but there is a weight to it, as if each movement requires more consideration than before. You continue. Two figures stand near the edge of the street, speaking in low tones. You hear fragments as you pass. Work gone. Ships turned away. Waiting. The words settle heavily, even in their brevity. A small but telling detail appears in personal correspondence from the period where residents describe the economic strain caused by the port's closure, noting not only lost income, but a growing uncertainty about how long such conditions might last. You can feel that uncertainty here not as panic, but as something quieter, persistent. You walk further, noticing how movement itself has changed. People still pass, but less frequently. Their steps are slower, their attention more inward. You probably would not expect how much the absence of activity can shape a place. Not what is happening, But what is no longer happening? A cart sits idle near the side of the road, its wheels still, its contents covered. No one stands beside it. No one moves to guide it forward. It simply remains as if waiting for a purpose that has not yet returned. You glance at it briefly, then continue. A question that continues to occupy historians is how communities adapt to sudden economic disruption and how long it takes for new patterns to form in response. Walking here, it feels as though you are witnessing that transition in its early stages. Nothing has fully settled yet. The old rhythms have slowed. The new ones have not yet taken shape. You pass a doorway where a man stands looking out into the street. He does not move as you approach his posture, still his gaze distant. For a moment it feels as though he is not seeing the street at all, but something beyond it. You nod slightly as you pass. He does not respond, not out of rudeness, but distraction. You continue. The street curves again, and for a brief moment the sound of voices rises from a nearby building. Laughter softer than before, but still present. It reaches you, then fades as the door closes, returning the street to its quieter state. You begin to notice how sound behaves differently now. Not absent, but contained. Each noise appears, then settles quickly as if the space itself absorbs it. You take a slower breath. The air feels heavier though, not unpleasant, just still. A perspective explored by historians suggests that hardship often reveals the underlying resilience of a community not through dramatic action but through small, consistent adjustments. You can sense that here, in the careful arrangement of goods, in the measured pace of movement, in the quiet conversations that continue despite uncertainty. You step into a slightly brighter area where a lantern burns more steadily. The light reveals details you might have missed otherwise. The worn edges of a doorway, the faint marks left by repeated use, the subtle signs of maintenance, of effort, of continuity. Life has not stopped. It has changed. You probably begin to understand that this is not a moment of collapse, but of strain, of adjustment, of waiting. You move beyond the light, back into the dimmer stretch of the street, your steps steady, your awareness deeper now. Behind you the harbour remains. Ahead the town continues, and within it something is shifting quietly, shaping the way people live, work and endure. You keep walking and the quiet weight of the street follows you for a time, settling into your steps, into your breathing. The town feels thinner here, as if parts of it have been pulled away, leaving behind spaces that were once filled with noise, trade and movement. But then gradually something else begins to take its place. Not silence, not quite, but tension. You notice it first in how people stand. Two figures speak near a doorway, their voices low, their posture slightly angled away from one another, as if the space between them matters more than usual. One gestures briefly, then stops, letting the hand fall back to their side. The other does not respond immediately. The pause stretches. You walk past, but the feeling lingers. A widely accepted observation in historical studies is that the years leading up to open conflict in Boston created divisions within communities where neighbours could hold sharply different views about loyalty and resistance. Standing here, that division does not appear as open argument. It appears as distance. You continue. Further along, a small group stands, gathered, but unlike the clusters you have seen before, this one feels less fluid. The people within it hold their positions more firmly, their expressions more guarded. One speaks, another listens, but the exchange lacks the ease you've grown used to. You hear a word. Loyalty. Then another. Rights. The conversation does not rise in volume, but it sharpens in tone, each response more deliberate than the last. A subtle detail mentioned in some personal writings suggests that even within families, disagreements about allegiance could create quiet, strain-altering relationships in ways that were not always visible from the outside. You begin to understand how that might feel. Not a break, but a shift. You move on, though, more slowly now, your attention drawn to the spaces between people as much as to the people themselves. A man passes you, his pace steady, his gaze fixed ahead. As he nears another figure coming from the opposite direction, there is a brief hesitation. Not enough to stop, but enough to register. They pass without speaking, without looking directly at one another. The moment is small, but it carries weight. You probably would not expect how much can be communicated without words. A glance avoided, a pause extended, a step adjusted. You continue walking and the street opens slightly. revealing a wider area where more people move through at once. Yet even here, where movement is more constant, the same pattern holds. Conversations are shorter. Laughter, when it appears, fades more quickly. There is a sense of awareness that seems to sit just beneath the surface of everything. A question that continues to engage historians is how deeply these divisions penetrated everyday life and whether they were experienced more as open conflict or as quiet, persistent tension. Walking here, it feels like the latter, not visible in a single moment, but present across many. You pass a small shop where two figures stand inside speaking across a counter. Their voices are calm, but their posture suggests something unresolved. One leans slightly forward, the other remains more still, their hands resting on the surface between them. The space feels narrow, not physically, but emotionally. You move on. A woman stands near a doorway watching the street. Her expression is thoughtful, her gaze moving from one passerby to another as if she is measuring something she cannot fully see. You wonder briefly what she notices, what she knows, what she chooses not to say. Another perspective explored in historical discussions suggests that communities under strain often develop subtle ways of signaling trust or suspicion, gestures and habits that carry meaning without being openly declared. You begin to recognize that here, in who stands close, in who keeps distance, in who speaks freely, and who does not. You take a slower breath. The air feels the same, yet your awareness of it has changed. You notice the small shifts more clearly now. The way a voice lowers when another person approaches. The way a conversation ends just a little too quickly. You probably begin to understand that this kind of tension does not always lead to immediate action. Sometimes it settles, becomes part of the background. A constant presence that shapes behavior without announcing itself. You walk further and the street narrows again, returning to a more familiar shape. The number of people decreases slightly, and with it the intensity softens, though it does not disappear entirely. A door opens ahead, and two figures step out, their conversation already in progress. They speak quietly, their tone more relaxed than others you have heard. Yet even here there is a carefulness to their words. They pass you without pause. Their voices fade behind you. You continue forward. The town stretches ahead, unchanged in its structure, yet altered in its feeling. The same buildings, the same streets, the same patterns of movement. But something beneath it all has shifted. You carry that awareness with you now, not as a burden, but as an understanding that life here is not only shaped by what people do, but by what they believe, and how those beliefs sit beside one another in the same narrow space. You continue forward carrying that quiet tension with you, though it begins to settle into something more structured as you move deeper into the town. The uncertainty does not disappear, but it starts to take shape, forming into patterns that feel more deliberate. You notice it in the sound first. Not a conversation this time. Not trade. A different rhythm. Footsteps measured and repeated in unison. You follow the sound. It leads you to an open stretch of ground where the space feels intentionally cleared, as if it has been set aside for a purpose that requires room to move. The light here is softer, filtered through the fading edge of the evening, but still enough to reveal what is happening. A group of men stands arranged in loose formation, not perfectly aligned, not uniform in appearance, but moving together. One steps forward, then back. Another raises an arm, then lowers it in time with the others. The motions are simple, repeated, practiced. You watch from the edge. A commonly recognized aspect of this period is the increasing importance of local militia groups composed of ordinary citizens preparing themselves for potential conflict. Standing here, that idea becomes visible in a way that is both quiet and unmistakable. These are not soldiers in the formal sense. They are people you have already seen in other parts of the town. Workers, neighbours, familiar figures now moving in a different way. A man calls out instructions, his voice firm but not harsh. The others respond with movement rather than words, adjusting their positions, correcting small mistakes, repeating the same action again. Step, pause, turn, repeat. You notice how uneven the group is at first. Some move with confidence, others in hiccups and hesitate, their timing slightly off. But with each repetition, the differences begin to narrow. The rhythm steadies. A lesser-known detail from local records suggests that many militia members supplied their own equipment and trained irregularly, often balancing preparation with the demands of daily work. You can imagine that here. The movements are not perfect, but they are improving. You probably would not expect how quickly practice begins to change the way people carry themselves. A man who seemed ordinary in the street now stands more upright, his movements more controlled, his attention more focused. Another adjusts his stance, correcting it without being told, as if the pattern has already begun to settle into his body. You shift your position slightly, allowing a better view. The ground beneath them is worn in places marked by repeated steps that have pressed into the surface over time. This is not the first time they have gathered here, and it will not be the last. A question that continues to interest historians is how prepared these militias truly were compared to professional soldiers, and how much their strength came from training versus determination. Watching here, it feels as though both elements are still forming. Not complete, but growing. A small pause occurs as the group resets. Some lower their arms. Others take a breath, their posture relaxing just slightly before tightening again. The man giving instructions nods once, then calls out again. The pattern resumes. Step, turn, hold. The repetition creates a kind of rhythm that feels almost separate from the rest of the town. While the streets carry their usual movement, this space holds something more focused, more intentional. You hear a quiet exchange behind you. Two figures stand watching, their voices low. Soon. We must be ready. The words are brief, but they settle heavily. You probably begin to understand that this is not just preparation, it is expectation. You turn your attention back to the group. Their movements are more synchronized now. Not perfect, but closer. A perspective explored by historians suggests that the act of training together helped build not only skill, but a shared sense of purpose among participants. You can see that here. The group moves not just as individuals, but as something forming between them. A connection, a coordination. You watch as one man falters slightly, his timing off by a fraction. He corrects himself quickly, glancing toward the others, then realigning with the group. No one calls it out. No one needs to. The adjustment is enough. You take a slow breath. The air here feels different, less crowded with the overlapping sense of the town. More open, more focused. The sounds of the street still reach you, but they feel distant, as if they belong to another layer of experience. Here the rhythm is clear, defined. You probably would not expect how calm this looks from a distance. No shouting, no urgency. Just repetition. But beneath it something is building. You step back slightly, allowing the scene to settle into your memory. The movements continue. The pattern holds. And as you turn to leave, the sound of those measured steps follows you. For a moment then fades as you return to the narrow streets. The town receives you again, its usual rhythm closing around you. But now you carry something new with you. The understanding that beneath the surface of daily life, preparation is taking shape. Quietly, steadily, and with purpose. You leave the open ground behind, though the steady rhythm of those practice steps lingers faintly in your mind. As you return to the narrower streets, the town feels familiar again, yet altered in a way that is difficult to fully explain. It is not quieter, not busier, but more aware. You notice it in the way people move past one another, in the way conversations begin and end more quickly, as if time itself has become something to be used carefully. The light has shifted again, not fully night, not fully day, a kind of in-between that softens edges but sharpens attention. You walk forward, your pace unhurried, though something in the air seems to encourage alertness. A door opens ahead and a man steps out, pausing briefly before closing it behind him with more care than usual. He looks down the street, then the other way, as if measuring distance rather than direction. You continue. A well-established interpretation of this period highlights the days leading up to open conflict as a time of heightened uncertainty when ordinary routines continued, yet were carried out with the awareness that they might soon be disrupted. Walking here, that idea feels present in every small action. Nothing has stopped, but nothing feels entirely secure. You pass a group of people standing close together, their conversation low and steady. One of them gestures briefly, pointing towards a direction you cannot see. The others nod, their expression serious, their posture attentive. There is no raised voice, no visible urgency. But the focus is unmistakable. A small but telling detail found in some first-hand accounts is that information about troop movements and intentions often spread through informal networks carried by word of mouth rather than official announcements. You begin to notice how that might work. A phrase spoken here, repeated there, adjusted slightly as it moves. You hear fragments as you pass. Movement, road, soon. The words are incomplete, but they carry enough meaning to settle in your thoughts. You probably would not expect how much can be understood from so little. You continue walking, and the street bends again, revealing a slightly wider space where more people are gathered than before. Not crowded, but enough to suggest something shared. A man stands near the center, speaking quietly to those closest to him. Others listen, then turn away, carrying the information outward. The group does not remain fixed. It shifts, expands, then reforms. A question that continues to occupy historians is how coordinated these early movements truly were, and how much relied on informal communication rather than structured planning. Standing here, it feels as though both are present. Order within uncertainty, structure within movement. You step to the side as someone passes quickly, their pace faster than most at their expression focused. They do not stop, they do not speak, but their urgency is clear in the way they move. You watch them go, then return your attention to the space around you. The light continues to fade slightly, though it never fully disappears. Lanterns begin to appear again, their glow steady, their presence marking points of clarity within the dimming street. You move between them. Light, shadow, light again. Each step feels more deliberate now, not because the ground has changed, but because your awareness has deepened. A perspective explored in historical analysis suggests that the transition from tension to open conflict often occurs gradually, with many small moments building toward a larger shift. Walking here, it feels as though you are within that transition. Not at the beginning, not yet at the end, but somewhere in between. You hear a distant sound, not clear enough to identify, but different. You pause briefly listening. It fades. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps something you will understand later. You continue. A woman stands near a doorway speaking to someone inside. Her voice is calm, but her posture suggests readiness, as if she might need to move quickly if required. The person inside responds, their words softer, harder to hear. The exchange is brief, then the door closes. You probably begin to notice how often people look outward now, toward the street, toward the distance, as if expecting something that has not yet arrived. You take a slow breath. The air feels steady, though your awareness of it has changed. You notice the subtle shifts more clearly. The way a sound carries further, the way movement draws your attention more quickly. You walk on, the street stretches ahead, familiar in its shape, yet carrying a different weight. The same buildings stand, the same paths unfold, but the feeling beneath it all has shifted. You carry that with you now, not as fear, but as anticipation, a sense that the ordinary rhythm you have come to understand is close to changing. You step into another pool of lantern light, pausing for just a moment as it surrounds you. The glow feels steady, grounding, even as everything else seems to hover on the edge of movement. Then you step beyond it and continue forward. You continue forward, carrying that quiet sense of anticipation with you, though it begins to settle into something calmer as the street opens once more. The movement around you has not disappeared, but it feels less urgent now, as if the town itself is taking a slower breath after holding it for too long. The lantern light stretches ahead in a gentle line, guiding your steps without demanding them. You walk steadily. The sounds around you soften not into silence, but into something more even. A door closes in the distance. Footsteps pass, then fade. A quiet voice rises, then lowers again. Each sound appears, then settles, leaving space behind it. The town feels familiar again, yet not the same. You pass a row of houses where the windows glow faintly from within their light, warm and steady. Inside, figures move slowly, their shape softened by shadow. The day's work has ended, but life continues in smaller, quieter ways. A pot being stirred, a chair adjusted, a conversation shared in low tones. A well-known historical perspective holds that by the mid-1770s, Boston had already been deeply transformed by years of political tension, economic strain and social change, even before full war took hold. Walking here now, you feel that transformation not as a single event, but as something that has settled into every part of daily life. Nothing looks entirely different, but nothing feels untouched. You move a little more slowly. The ground beneath your feet feels familiar now, its unevenness no longer surprising. The air with its mix of smoke, damp wood, and faint traces of salt settles easily into your breath. You probably would not notice it as sharply anymore. You have adjusted. A small, often overlooked detail in personal accounts is how people continue to maintain routines even during uncertain times, finding stability in repetition when larger forces felt beyond their control. You recognize that now, in the steady lighting of lamps, in the closing of doors, in the quiet continuation of ordinary tasks. You pass a narrow alley, but this time it does not feel as uncertain as before. You understand its shape now, its place within the larger pattern of the town. The darkness within it remains, but it no longer feels unfamiliar. You continue on. A man walks past you, his pace unhurried, his expression neutral. There is no urgency in his movement, only continuation. Another follows at a distance, their steps matching the same quiet rhythm. The town is settling, not sleeping, but easing. A question that continues to interest historians is how individuals experience these years of change in their own daily lives beyond the larger events that define the period. Standing here, it feels as though the answer lies in moments like this. In walking, in breathing, in continuing. You take a slower breath, letting it fill your chest fully before releasing it again. The air feels cooler now, the night deepening, though not in a way that feels heavy. More like a soft covering. You notice how the lantern light seems gentler, less sharp, its glow spreading more evenly across the ground. The shadows it casts are softer, less defined, blending into the spaces around them. A perspective explored in historical reflection suggests that even in times of uncertainty, people adapt not by abandoning routine, but by carrying it forward, reshaped but intact. You feel that here, in every step, in every quiet moment. You walk a little further, then slow. The street stretches ahead, but there is no need to follow it much longer. The movement has brought you through enough of this place, enough of its rhythms, its tensions, its quiet continuations. You pause. The air settles around you. The sounds soften further, becoming less distinct, more blended like a distant memory rather than an immediate presence. You take one more slow breath and let it go. The town remains, steady, present, but your awareness of it begins to soften just slightly, as if the edges of everything are becoming less defined. The lantern light dims in your perception, not because it has changed, but because your focus has. The sounds drift. Footsteps, voices, the faint creak of wood, all still there, but further away. You stand for a moment longer, allowing everything to settle. Then you begin to move again, not toward anything specific, but simply forward your steps, light your pace, unhurried. The street carries you gently, the night surrounds you softly, and the town, with all its layers of life tension and quiet endurance, fades into something calmer, something distant, something that no longer asks anything of you. You breathe in, slowly, and out, letting the rhythm guide you. The world softens, the details blur, the movement slows, and you are left with only the quiet sense of having been here, of having walked these streets, of having felt the life of this place not in its loudest moments but in its most ordinary ones. Now everything eases. The air feels lighter, the sounds quieter, your steps slower. You no longer need to notice every detail. You can let them pass, let them fade. Let them settle into the background, and as you continue, the town becomes less a place you move through and more a feeling that gently recedes. Calm, steady, at rest. Sweet dream!